Good afternoon, everyone. Again, this is Olivia Giordano at the Healthy Start TA and Support Center. Welcome to Fatherhood Talk Tuesday. We're going to get started. People may be joining in the next few minutes, but we want to be respectful of everyone's time.
Hi there. My name is Tess Pritchard, and I'm the project specialist on the TA and Support Center team here at NICHQ. We're going to begin this webinar by reviewing some standard housekeeping items to ensure you all get the most out of the webinar. Before handing it off to Ken Harris, the director of the Supporting Healthy Start Performance Project here at NICHQ. So here's our webinar agenda for today. We will be primarily discussing Healthy Start fatherhood within MCH framework and homeless fathers. Moving along to some logistics. This session is being recorded and will be posted to the Epic Center for future viewing. All participants are muted upon entry. We ask that you remain muted to limit background noise. We encourage you to use the chat box to ask questions and post comments throughout this webinar. All questions will be captured from the chat box, and we will address as many as we can during the webinar. We will create a Q&A document that captures all questions and answers that will be posted to the Epic Center with the webinar recording. Moving into some audio logistics. If you can hear me, you're likely connected correctly. We'll do a quick review to ensure everyone's on the same page. Join the meeting by clicking the link in the email that was sent to you upon registering for this webinar. An audio conference box will appear. You can either join by computer audio or phone call. If you'd like to use computer audio, just click computer audio and you should be all set. If you would like to join by phone call, dial the given number, enter the meeting ID and press pound. Then you're given participant ID and press pound. You will then be connected to the webinar audio. Next, I'll review use of the chat box. At the bottom of the Zoom screen, you'll see a toolbar. Click chat and it will launch the chat box on the right side of your screen. Type your questions or comments into the chat box and send to everyone. Again, we encourage the use of the chat box for any questions or comments you may have during this webinar. Before we dive in, we have set up a way for you all to engage virtually with us during this presentation. We will again be utilizing Poll Everywhere to ask you some questions that will guide us in planning of future Fatherhood Talk Tuesdays. Poll Everywhere is a program that allows each of you to send your thoughts to us via text messaging or any browser. If you're interested in participating in this way, I'll spend a couple minutes getting us set up. The easiest way to use Poll Everywhere is through text messaging. So you begin by opening up a new text message. The phone number that you will send your text to is 22333. In order to log into this particular session, go ahead and text the word Healthy Start 428 to the number 22333. No spaces in Healthy Start 428, but capitalization does not matter. Once you've logged in, you will receive a confirmation message that you have joined. A few additional Poll Everywhere tips. Again, capitalization does not matter, but spelling and spaces do. You only need to text the word Healthy Start 428 the first time. After that, you can send all of your answers to poll questions on that same text thread. If texting doesn't work, you can go ahead and visit that link up on the screen, pollev.com/healthystart428 to respond to the current poll. There will be no charges to your cell phone beyond what your carrier typically charges for a text message. Now that you're all set up to participate by texting responses to questions that we pose in this presentation. Now I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Ken for our presentation.
Good afternoon, everyone. I hope your week is going well. We're excited for today's Talk Tuesday. What we've done today, in addition to having a topic discussion on homelessness, incarceration, and mental health and substance abuse with fathers, we also want to take this opportunity to give a presentation based on some of the TA requests we've received and more on learnings from the needs assessment. And so we certainly want to take time to talk about the fatherhood work within Healthy Start. So before we get started, we want to also utilize our chat box as we usually do. So I'm going to really direct everyone to the chat box to the right of your screen. And the way we want to do introductions today, just chat your name, your project, and just highlight a challenge that you've had in year one as you all are coming upon the close of your first year of this cycle. So just chat in your name, the project that you're with, and then a challenge that you're having or have had for this first year, because we've heard different things. So And we invite each of you to kind of look at some of the challenges, because some of you may have had some of the same challenges, and then we have a discussion. It can support many of you that are sharing challenges. So again, your name, the project, and a challenge you may have had for this first year. And also a shout out to Kadora Barnes, who's joining us because Brandon Wood's unable to be here today. So thank you, Kadora. For continue chatting, and thank you all that are chatting. And I think, and I'm seeing a lot of recruitment. And so I know that is certainly on the top of our list with regards to providing TA around that. And I know our in-person meeting for the grantees meeting, that's one area we're looking forward to sharing some support around. And so we'll continue to do that in other ways as well. So again, we're talking about Healthy Start Fatherhood, and it's fatherhood within a maternal child health framework. And for those that may be new to Healthy Start or maternal child health, it's important to understand how we see fatherhood within Healthy Start. And then also later on, we're going to be joined by someone from the Boston Healthy Start Initiative, Rich DeRosa, who's going to talk about homelessness and something that they're doing here in Massachusetts. But some of the topics that came up from the last Father Talk Tuesday were subjects like homeless fathers or incarcerated fathers and fathers with mental health and substance abuse. And these things are really connected. So I wanted to take time to show that connection and talk about that a little bit. And certainly Carol Melton, I think, had that question last month from Piedmont Healthy Start. And so we'll look at that a little bit later on in the presentation. But first, we're going to start with the fatherhood within MCH. And so today, our goals, our objectives really are to increase your understanding of Healthy Start Fatherhood. That'll support you in executing on this grant. Also highlight some areas of opportunity for inclusion, connection, and engagement to increase your enrollment numbers. Because again, that's something we've been hearing as a challenge for folks. And then, as I said, we're going to discuss issues that are related to homeless fathers, incarceration, mental health, and substance abuse. So those are our objectives for today. So within Healthy Start, when we think about Healthy Start Fatherhood, really one thing that comes to mind is really promoting father involvement. And doing that, Healthy Start grantees have been engaged in efforts to involve fathers in your program activities. So again, a good understanding of your Healthy Start program is important, and then involving fathers in those to increase his involvement with children and promote responsible fatherhood. And the goal of these activities are to improve overall well-being of children by increasing the proportion of children that actually grow up with a dad who's present, involved, and responsible and committed. And with that includes providing practical support during pregnancy. And again, many of you have asked, what do you do once a dad is enrolled? And I think a big piece is really how is he integrated in that pregnancy? So providing practical support during pregnancy is one role that he plays there. And then raising children, and then helping parents develop supportive and effective relationships. So many folks offer workshops around healthy relationships as an example, but promoting father involvement. And what we've learned from the CAM model from the Association on Fatherhood, we look at fatherhood across a life course, and that's something that we've learned through our work in Healthy Start Maternal Child Health, having a life course approach. And so again, that's applied to our fatherhood work. And so it's really before, during, after, and beyond is a way of remembering across the life course. And of course, before and during, it's really promoting that father involvement. So partner involvement during pregnancy, and then also throughout pregnancy, and then after and beyond really covers parenting and co-parenting, and really just supporting across the life course. So as you as a father coordinator begin to work with your Healthy Start sites and your colleagues there that are care coordinators, case managers, outreach workers, community health workers, you really are discussing how he plays a role in his responsibility along this particular life course. So again, before, during, after, and beyond pregnancy. Again, we've shared this slide. We'll continue to share the slide just to be clear, to let folks know that when you think of Healthy Start fathers, it's really connecting them to preconception, connecting him to pregnancy, and then of course, birth outcomes. And the reason it's important to have a Healthy Start father connected to a Healthy Start mom is around the birth outcomes, because we are an infant mortality initiative. And at the end of the day, we have to demonstrate improvement in birth outcomes. So again, when you think of fatherhood within this maternal child health program, it's really about him and centering on birth outcomes. And then of course, his role in the postpartum phase, but looking at pediatric care. So again, his involvement there, taking children to pediatric appointments, et cetera. And then the parenting, or even if it's co-parenting. And that's where some of the benchmarks around reading come into play, and this support along that way. So looking at breastfeeding and during this phase, family planning, as I said, pediatric care, and then early development, or early learning. And then when you think of the father in particular, and the child, just focus on pregnancy outcomes, birth outcomes, infant health outcomes, child health outcomes, reproductive life planning. So again, as your program is focusing on reproductive life planning, what role can dads play in that? How do you include him in those conversations when you're having them in the clinic or in the health center, or wherever you're talking, your program talks with the Healthy Start female participant? How do you include dads in that conversation as well? Because that's one area in particular that men and fathers have been left out of, and that's reproductive life planning. So again, thinking about strategies there, parenting and breastfeeding, as I mentioned earlier. So another thing that we get from the co-adaptive model for fatherhood is really thinking about a starting point for Healthy Start programs. And again, fatherhood within Healthy Start has grown over and evolved over these almost 30 years of Healthy Start being around, because although Healthy Start started in 1991, that without having a focus on fatherhood, many of the original 15 or 22 programs focus on fatherhood. So folks are at different levels of what you're doing with fathers. And so some folks, through our early years of assessment, are able to provide some small range of services for dads, and that's all that you can do based on your resources. And some people have larger resources where you actually have an initiative, a small program, some specific cadre of services that you offer dad. And then some of you are at a maximum level where you actually have a full fatherhood program, and you might have a coordinator or a director. You may also have outreach workers, case managers. You have a real full fatherhood program under or in partnership with you. So that's a way of thinking about a starting point for many of you where you might be. But then for all of us, it begins with the intake. So what happens once a father is enrolled in the program? How do we connect him across that continuum of services as we discussed? So the prenatal, interconception, case management, et cetera. So whatever program services that are offered by your Healthy Start program, it's really beginning to see dads as part of that service continuum. And then also, if you think on the program level, if you have a larger resources where you're actually implementing a full fatherhood program, and then he's enrolled in your program, then you are providing outreach, you do case management, you're doing the job readiness, the employment, court support, you have that full cadre of services to offer him. The thing to keep in mind with fatherhood within MCH is that our programs are not designed to serve the full breadth of what men may need. And so it's really important that you have partnerships at the CAN level, the Community Action Network. And that's where you have organizations that are really providing more comprehensive services for men and fathers. And those are great partners to have, because then you can set up a memorandum of understanding or agreement to work with those agencies to become referral agencies for your fathers. And that way you can refer Healthy Start Father to that program where he can get a full service. And then because of your relationship, you're able to then describe a full cadre of services that he's receiving just through your initiative. So this is basic stuff to think about when you think of Healthy Start fatherhood work within maternal child health. So at this time, let's take a poll. So we talked a while ago, and many of you from our poll had not had a chance to check out the benchmarks, and especially the ones that refer to father participants. And so we just wanted to take a poll now and ask, have you reviewed the Healthy Start benchmarks, especially those that refer to father participants? So if you would take time to answer either yes or no. And again, use the poll everywhere. And while folks are still answering, the reason we talked about this as being important, because although there are 3 specific benchmarks for father and partners, the other benchmarks is also when you're working with your project director and staff, there are other strategies that you may end up developing based on the other benchmarks. For example, around breastfeeding, and we've been talking about men and breastfeeding. And so again, what role can he play in helping us reach those benchmarks? And that is, breastfeeding up to 6 months and then beyond 6 months. And so again, it's helpful to know all of the benchmarks, okay? All right, so another 15 seconds. So those that put your answer in the chat box, if you go ahead and put it in the poll everywhere so we can have this data and so that everyone can kind of see where we are as a community of fatherhood coordinators. Okay. All right. All right, so keep answering, I guess, and then we'll go ahead. But again, oh, that changed. Oh, good. That looks better. All right, so most of you have read and reviewed the benchmarks, and we're just going to encourage the rest of you to really do that. And it's part of the deliverables for fatherhood. And so it's really important that you know these benchmarks. And what we're doing here at the center and through the Father Talk Tuesdays, we work with the division. We really want to support you in achieving these benchmarks. And so it helps to know them. And so we will continue to review them and put them before you, but let's start with reading them. All right, so thank you. Let's move on. So here are the 3 benchmarks specific for father involvement, but increasing the proportion of women participants that demonstrate father and partner involvement during pregnancy. And this is important because some of the other data that's been shared with you all through works from Craig Garfield and many others that talks about the importance of connecting men early, and the chances, if they get connected early, it increases the chances of men staying connected throughout the pregnancy. So again, this is an important benchmark. And as men are showing up in clinics with their partners, enrolling them right away and keeping them connected is really important. That next benchmark is about increasing the proportion of Healthy Start women participants that demonstrate father and partner involvement with regards to attending appointments, classes, infant and child care with the child participant up to 80%. So again, if you don't have benchmarks on these, baseline data for these benchmarks, the first year may have been spent establishing that. And then the third one really is increasing the proportion of Healthy Start child participants aged 24 months or less who are read to by a parent or family member 3 or more times a week. Okay, so the reading to your child. All right, so those are the 3 specific on fathers or males, but it helps to read all 19. So here we are at another poll. So the question now is your project meeting your fatherhood enrollment numbers for year 1? And I know early on, many of you talked about challenges. And I know some of you received some support in this area. So just let us know as a collective, kind of where we are as a community of fatherhood coordinators and Healthy Start programs, if you're meeting your numbers. Because next month is the end. This month is the end of year 1. So again, use the poll everywhere. We appreciate you chatting in, but if you wouldn't mind just using the poll everywhere, and that way the entire community can see where we are as a group. Okay, with those that have met your fatherhood enrollment, if there was 1 or 2 key things you did that helped you do that, chat that in the box, and that way your colleagues can see those strategies that you may have used. But again, those that were able to meet your numbers or on track to meet your numbers, if you would just chat in the chat box 1 or 2 things you think led to that, that your colleagues can kind of take a look at and see what was working for you. Okay, so as we see, most people have not and had a challenge, but we want to make sure through our TA, your needs are clear and that we can support you in meeting your numbers. And so hopefully today's presentation is going to help get to more of that. Okay, so thank you all for taking that poll. So when we talk about fatherhood within maternal child health and within Healthy Start, we really think about involvement, inclusion, and integration. And that's a way of thinking about levels of engagement for fathers. So we talk about involvement, inclusion, and integration. It's really fathers' involvement in the Healthy Start program. And so again, it's not just you, but speaking with your entire project team about the program and how we involve fathers in our program. And if there's a need for training for the entire staff, those are things you think about at a programmatic level. Also, involvement and inclusion is around practices. So how do we include him in our practices? So in our prenatal practice, how do we include men and fathers in that? And then we look at policies and procedures and how you make room for men and fathers there. So again, integrating policies that support his involvement and also paying attention to those policies and procedures that actually presents barriers to his participation. And I know as a fatherhood coordinator, depending on the experience of your dad, he might be involved with several systems where policies and procedures really prevent him from being actively engaged or more involved with the partner and with the baby. And so again, your work with him is also looking at policies and procedures. So again, when you think of involvement, inclusion, integration, you have to unpack it. And then it's just in participation and being able to describe a Healthy Start program, being able to describe how men are participating in the existing services. And that's really a first step. Even before you start building new services for dads, it's really important to make sure that he is actually integrated into the existing Healthy Start program, which is something we've been emphasizing for a while, and we'll continue to do that. So, and it's important also because we already know through our early research and early work from fatherhood programs and Healthy Start that men and fathers, our actions of men impact mothers' parenting practices. So again, that supportive role that men can play. Men and fathers directly impact their children. So again, this life course approach is important because him being a part during a pregnancy and after in the early years is really critical for early child development. And some of the issues and the topics that we're going to talk about today, this next bullet speaks to. So we know that a lot of these guys have challenges and issues around domestic violence, their substance use, mental health, and incarceration impacts negatively on the development of these healthy relationships. And so again, we're going to talk about that a little bit today, but that's an ongoing conversation because many of the men have some of these as challenges. So we'll deal with that a little bit. And then as we think about low-income families in general, they face a number of intra and interpersonal challenges that undermine their relationships. So again, these families are dealing with multiple systems that sometimes impede their ability to even have healthy relationships. So those are things to keep in mind, again, within Healthy Start Fatherhood within MCH framework. So when we think about services, and this is one of the questions that came up a lot in the needs assessment and afterwards, and just question, what kind of services are you able to provide? And that's where people are struggling. And so we want to shed a little light on that. And so two ways of thinking about services and really examining what services can you provide within the Healthy Start program. So looking internally. So as we said earlier, when you think of prenatal engagement, just including a dad in prenatal engagement, whether it's 13 or 16 visits, maybe you have a goal of him being with her each of those visits. And so how many visits did he make? And we also find that from earlier work with Healthy Start women participants is having their partners with them during those visits makes them feel better. And that could lead to be connected to a healthy outcome, that she feels supported and happy during the pregnancy. Also, when education is going on around the pregnancy, male partners are there to hear the same information, again, able to support even back at home. So think about the different services that you offer to your women participants, the pregnant participants, and just think internally, what kind of services can he now be included in? So it's not just services for the father, but it's services we're doing for the mom that he can actually be included in. So again, back to that involvement and inclusion there. And then you think of services that may be needed externally. So outside of your Healthy Start program. So again, there's no Healthy Start program that's been funded to do a full fatherhood program. So many of us, excuse me, many of you. Those that know, I was a former project director, so sometimes I say us, sorry. But you think of the service needs of men really go beyond what most Healthy Starts can do. And so again, I emphasize looking externally at those agencies in your communities that become part of your Healthy Start that become part of your service extension. So you can then refer these men and fathers to those programs where they can get more comprehensive services and stay connected to your services. So again, thinking of services internally and then externally. So when we talk about outreach and recruitment, which many of you talk a lot about, it's very important. So we're going to deal with that a little bit. So with outreach and recruitment, again, starting within. So who within the Healthy Start program, the current staff, how does each of those staff participate in recruiting fathers? And we know that if you have care coordinators, community health workers, if they understand the importance of fatherhood and importance for him to be involved, then as they're out as a community outreach worker doing your work in the community, as you see dads with moms, you're able to talk about fatherhood and connect with dads that way, and then make a referral to a father coordinator as an example. As your care coordinators and case managers that are actually enrolling women, maybe in the clinic, and whether it's hospital or health center, again, those folks being able to outreach and recruit, asking a female participant about her partner. And so again, it's an opportunity to think about putting protocol in place, strategies in place for those workers to begin to engage the female participant in enrolling dads, as well as other staff around. So that leads to training needed for staff. So maybe after a year, as you guys continue to think about outreach and recruitment, you might feel there's some needed training. And so maybe that would be your TA request. And we're really trying to help folks be specific around their requests for fatherhood, like what area and what is it that you really need. And I appreciate and giving a shout out to the folks in Ohio, people in Louisiana, as well as North Carolina, because we were able to follow up with them with their TA requests to be more specific about the need. And so we encourage you all to continue to reach out to the center, and so we can really help define what your needs are, and especially around the training. And that's why I wanted to mention that today. But with outreach and recruitment, is there a training needed for staff? We can help develop that training as we're doing with Washington, the DC Healthy Start. Also with outreach and recruitment, there's a need to have protocols for the engagement. So again, if you don't have protocols in place, then perhaps that's an area that we can support you in. And then we really want to point out the big opportunity, which is the first door to these men is actually through the mother. And so again, with those workers that are working with the female participant, really looking to her as the first door. So again, if a dad doesn't show up with mom in the clinic, what is the conversation that we want to have with mom? What's the question that we want to ask? So let's talk about connection then, so connecting men to programs. And so I've said it a few times, but just to highlight a few things. There we go. So we talked about pregnancy, so connecting him with pregnancy, with prenatal visits. If there are birthing classes, that's another place that he can get involved in. Any educational opportunities that you're offering for mom, workshops or trainings, then again, connecting him to those opportunities for workshops or training. Any parenting classes that you have, again, begin to include him and connect him to those services. And then many of you have described lots of great fatherhood activities that you're doing, which you also connect those dads to. Some of you all do monthly events. There are some folks that have network sessions or groups that they do with dads. And there's particular fatherhood events that you all do. So the fatherhood activities are a big hit, and that's something that you can coordinate. That's a way of connecting him. And then again, thinking of those external programs and services that you can connect him to. But it's important that when you're thinking about these dads, because many of them, their lives aren't as stable, you really want to find ways to really shore up the connection to your program. And so if you can offer something that keeps them coming back to you, that gives you some type of opportunity for regular connection with him. But again, if you can help him get other services, he's going to be also endeared to you because you're helping him get other services that he needs. So think of connection in that way. How can we just make sure that he's coming in on a regular basis, and we can lock in the engagement, which is what we talk about, locking in the engagement. So you may have few resources, but what can you do within your program now to include him and connect him to those services you're already doing? And then if there's something special you can do, like a network support group or something, you can do something like that. So that's connection. So when we think about engagement then, so the engagement is going a little deeper. So think about the engagement. So what are you all doing around enrollment? And I know something that we've talked about is standardizing approach for enrollment, which is the opportunity that we can have over these next few years. And so we're hoping that as the Fatherhood group works on and develops a collab and we get connected with the COIN work, we can start looking at what each of you are doing around enrollment and really come up with some standard approaches for enrolling these dads. At minimum, we want to make sure that you're getting demographic information, because again, if you may not have a lot of services to offer him, but if you don't get the demographic information, then it makes it hard for you all as coordinators to then follow up and try to get the dad engaged. And so really at enrollment, to make sure that you're getting some demographic information, so you have some tool that you're using. And then another question, another issue that's come up is around assessment. Do you have an assessment that you're using with these fathers? And so how many of you are using an assessment tool for your dads? Well, again, it's similar to the comprehensive risk assessment that we do with mom, but are you utilizing a tool? So if you could just use the chat box, and if you're using an assessment tool, just put your name, say yes, and if there's a tool that you want to describe, do that, because we would love to get a collection of those tools and at another time share them with the father coordinator community and talk about really looking at an assessment that everyone can use. So again, if you have an assessment that you use for dads, let us know and certainly share it. Also, engagement, you think about the services. As I was talking earlier, thinking about the kinds of services that you can connect them to, referrals, which are really important and based on those agencies that you work with. And then as a fatherhood coordinator, it's going to be important then that you have a tracking tool that you use so that you can follow up and follow through. So when it's time to report on these dads, although you didn't provide services around job readiness, employment, your partner did. And so you can get that information from your partner and certainly include it in the data that you report for your Healthy Start programming around the services that father or Healthy Start father received. So it's really important as coordinators, you have some way of tracking where dads are. And again, if you have those agreements in place, then you also can get data from your partners to really serve to describe what are you doing with the Healthy Start dad that's beyond what you can do, but it certainly shows the efficacy of your efforts in that community. So more on engagement is to think about, many of you are doing 24/7 dad curriculum. Some of you have other fatherhood curricula which you're using, which is great. And again, we encourage you all to do those the way they've been designed, because the efficacy of those programs are important. And if you have ideas around good curricula, then use the chat box to share a curriculum that you may be using. But our early assessment lets us know that most of you are doing the 24/7 dad curriculum. And share other father curriculum. Men's health is also important. These men come and they have great needs. And so again, a mechanism to connect men to some health services is really important. So, I think about health centers, and many of you are out there with health centers. Being able to offer some type of men's health clinic is important as well. So that's another opportunity for engagement there, if you can do that. And then, as I mentioned before, a support or networking group. Again, early research lets us know that if men have a place and space that's their own, they can actually begin to support each other. So it's not traditional formal support group where there's a licensed facilitator. We're talking about really a gathering place for men where you can bring resources and they can just kind of hang out and support each other around different issues. Engagement as across the life course, as we talked before, but just always think about preconceptionally, pregnancy, post-delivery, and pediatric, breastfeeding, support on reading. So again, across the life course helps you begin to think of different ways that you might engage him. So engagement is a really important part of fatherhood within the maternal child health framework. So we're going to direct you to the chat box again. So what I would like to answer this question, for those that are, please write in the chat the strategies for enrollment that are working for you. And then we sort of will ask a few of you to share if you would like to. And I think there is a raising hand option or no? I'm looking at my colleagues here. No, if you would like to speak up, just say I would like to share. But for the first part, just chat any strategies for enrollment that you're doing. And if we want a couple of people to share here, a couple of strategies that you're using around enrollment, what you're doing around enrollment that's working. Okay, we have any?
Mhm.
All right, well, let Greg in.
Greg, you're now unmuted if you'd like to share a little bit more about that strategy.
Okay. Chris, your turn. Yours. I got my coworker in here right now, so we're trying to reduce the echo. Okay, that's better.
Yep.
Okay. What we do, we have an internal mechanism with our case managers that actually work with the moms. So they're going out, they're receiving the WIC referrals, and we're receiving referrals from DCFS as well as through community events and word of mouth out there in the community. And once they bring them in, we actually will go out with our case manager to assist in recruiting the dad and getting the dad signed up. And some are signing up and wanting our case management through on the fatherhood side, and others are preferring, some want to stay with mom and actually they work as a team with our case managers. So that's been working fluid for us.
Okay. That's cool. So the dad decides. That's nice.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thanks so much for sharing, Greg. And Greg, what project are you with?
Oh, we're Healthy Start Lafayette, Louisiana.
Lafayette. All right. Great. Oh, I know Greg. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah, you're welcome.
All right.
Robert Love.
All right. Want to hear from Robert?
Okay, Robert, you're unmuted if you'd like to elaborate on that.
Can you hear us, Robert?
All right, well, Robert wrote, one of the things that has worked so far is using the Healthy Start employees who work with the mothers to introduce me to fathers. Once I can get in front of the dads, I'm usually able to get the dads on board.
That's good. So getting connected directly to a dad, and that's worked, having that personal contact with dads. Is there anyone else that's had that experience once you get in front of the dad, is more success engaging him? Again, any successful strategies to share? Okay. All right, we'll continue to chat, and if you have thoughts around that to share with your colleagues. All right, so another question is, when you think of an enrolled father, because everyone has different definitions of this, and so it's something we wanted to look at and thought it'd be important to explore. For your program, what do you consider, or who do you consider an enrolled dad? What does that consist of? To say that a dad's enrolled with your Healthy Start program. So use the chat box and just write that. And again, we'll ask a couple of people to share. But what constitutes an enrolled father? They're coming in. Everyone's thinking, nothing is coming yet. So this is clearly one of those areas that has come up, and the reason we're asking the question today. That people have thought about, when you say a dad's enrolled, what does that mean? What have you assured is a process that has collection tools, he's made it to the database, he's had a visit. What does an enrolled father mean? And similar to what constitutes an enrolled Healthy Start participant, female participant, we want to have the same thing in place for dads, and so you know that a dad is enrolled. But again, you're going to make efforts to go after all the dads, all the partners of the participants, but we know that all of those dads are not going to make it to enrollment. So what would constitute an enrolled dad? So we have someone?
Yes, Byron, I've just unmuted you.
Byron, you want to go ahead and share? We unmuted you, Byron, but we can't hear you. All right.
All right, let's try Nicole.
All right. Nicole, you're unmuted. Want to try?
Yeah, hi, can you hear me?
Good. Yep.
So what we're doing right now, I think our Healthy Start is probably pretty new compared to the rest of them. We don't quite have our fatherhood program live yet. So we don't have our fatherhood coordinator on board, but that's the way I consider them to be involved, is if I have their information in and if they are supporting the mother the way she wants to be supported. So currently that's what we're doing.
Okay. Great. Thank you, Nicole.
You're welcome.
So who talked about home visit? Yeah, so continue chatting, because I think I saw a couple of things. I saw someone that's enrolling at the home visit. It's done there. Yeah. And then Byron can come in again. So Greg, you want to talk about the home visiting?
Sure. We have a multi-phase. We have our first home visit is when we do our intake packet, where we do our demographic screen.
Mm-hmm.
And then then our second, that's introducing ourselves with the program and what it entails. Then we have a second home visit to do the assessment, which is our the bro and depression screening. Then the third visit is when we start to introduce the binder of how we're going to work and what their goals are. And on our fourth visit, we actually start working if it's going to be 24/7 dads, or if it's going to be nurturing fathers or nurturing parenting,
Mm-hmm.
along with their goals. And that's how our visits continue.
That's excellent. So 4 stages to that.
Yes, sir.
Nice. All right, very good. So folks may want to reach out to Greg. It sounds pretty coordinated there. Thank you, Greg.
You're welcome.
So Michael, you are now unmuted.
Go ahead, Jermichael. Maybe they're still on mute. All right. Make sure you share in the chat box. All right, we can't hear you. Mhm. Okay. All right. And just for the remainder of the call, if we unmute you, you might want to check to make sure you're not muted on your own device as well. So let's move on. So again, just continue to write in. Oh, all right. So again, thinking about direct services that your program offers dads, if you could chat that in. Okay, we've talked about a few, but think of your program and what services are you directly providing? So in addition to doing the 24/7 dads class, are there any other services? Do you have a case management services that you provide, similar to what we've heard from Greg, that actually has a whole packet and a care plan that's developed where you're working, so providing case management? What direct services does your program offer? So chat that in as well. Okay. And then lastly, there's a typo there, sorry. So what services are dad receiving through your program? Okay, so, yeah. So what services are dad receiving with your partner? So those that have organizations that are part of your CAN, what kind of services are dad getting externally? So again, with your program, is he getting job readiness externally through one of your partners? So again, we would love to hear from you what services dads are getting through your partners. Okay. All right, so continue to chat in. And so when we think of Healthy Start Fathers, and this has come up because of some earlier, again, connection we've had with some of you, but just being clear about who's a Healthy Start father or partner. And father or partners of Healthy Start are, Healthy Start fathers are those partners of Healthy Start participants, fathers of infants 18 months or younger. So again, very clear that fathers are connected to the Healthy Start participant, the mother. Fathers are also connected to those infants, okay? Because some of you, we've heard, are enrolling fathers that are not connected to participants or an infant, and those are not dads that you can count as Healthy Start dads, okay? But Healthy Start dad needs to be connected to a mom or a Healthy Start infant, okay? Just to be clear. And again, if you're a program that's providing more of a full fatherhood program, then just know that those other dads are counted as part of your overall fatherhood program, but again, not as Healthy Start dads. And so that's something that's come up a lot, and we wanted to clarify again that the division is very clear. These dads are connected to Healthy Start participants or Healthy Start infants. And so again, that internal outreach, making sure you're connected, and getting those dads connected to those moms is really a priority. And then any other outreach strategies that you devise, again, it's around getting to those dads. And as you're out in the community, as I heard, like outreach workers might be out in the community, again, you're looking for these dads in the community that may be with a child, a baby. And so that's somebody you can approach to say, hey, do you know about Healthy Start? Because again, you can enroll a dad that has a child 18 months or younger. So just things to keep in mind when talking about Healthy Start fathers, okay? And who you can count. So we talked about this assessment, so the importance of having a comprehensive assessment. So if you cannot do it, having a partner that does it is important. And so with a comprehensive assessment, this is where you're gonna discover needs around housing, if someone's formerly incarcerated. And we know through the Healthy Start fathers that most of Healthy Start fathers have had some issue with incarceration. And so that's just been a consistent thing we've noticed within Healthy Start over the years. And also when we think of what's happening in the age of mass incarceration, and when we think of African-American, Latino men, poor men that are in prison, and those that return to our community. So this has always been something we've looked at in fatherhood. And of course, the topics that we're talking about today, mental health and substance abuse, always comes up in the risk assessment. So again, earlier research we've shared over the years that these are some of the prime areas that come out with regards to needs of fathers around housing, incarceration, et cetera. So today's topic, again, are those areas of need for men and fathers emerging from the practice. So with that, has there been a fatherhood training on the inclusion of all of your Healthy Start workers at your project? So one of the things that comes up is the attitude of inclusion. Do we know how to include dads? Do we understand the importance of including dad? And that's a training that some Healthy Starts have received. And so our question here is really, have you had a training that focuses on inclusion at your Healthy Start program? So use the poll everywhere and just answer yes or no. Oh, Caprice, we hear you. We need it as soon as possible. So we're working actually on a webinar offering on that. So, because people have been asking for it. So again, we want to be responsive. That's why we're asking overall. Okay. Good. And thank you to those that continue to write in the services that you're providing directly. This is going to be really, really helpful. And again, we remind you that the chat is available post webinar, so you'll be able to review these notes from your colleagues as well. All right, so that gives you an idea when you look at the training on inclusion. It's an important piece, and many of you have talked about it, asked about it, and so we are working on a webinar, and Ken Scarborough has a great training that he does on the attitude of inclusion. So we certainly will be featuring a webinar soon on that. But just gives you an idea. Again, most people have not had that level of training. So there's Rich. Okay, Rich, we see you. Rich is here. Great. All right, let's go on. All right, so things that we can do. If you don't have a risk assessment, perhaps you want to think about developing a brief risk overview. And we have a link here that you'll be able to connect with. And some of you may be familiar with the brief risk overview by the Minnesota Health Department, but it's something they developed many, many years ago, and they actually made it available to anyone who wanted to use. This is a shorter assessment that's used with men, but we have a link here so you can check it out. I don't think it's still active now, but it certainly is a good example of something that you might want to think about using to develop your own if you don't have one. And certainly as a collective, as we move the fatherhood coordinators to the collab, which we'll talk about later, but that'll be an opportunity for you to think about focusing on a particular activity and perhaps a brief risk overview or something we want to think about as a group, or you want to think about as a group. Also, training needs, as we said, we're focusing on the attitude of inclusion, which Ken Scarborough is going to do for us. And if there are other training needs that you think of, then let us know specifically. So we'll continue to work with father coordinators really on developing best practices for enrollment. So again, part of getting some of this information today is to help us put together kind of a draft so we can talk about designing and talk a best practice for enrollment within Healthy Start Fatherhood work. So thank you so far. Okay. And so I think we have an answer already on this. We kind of asked the question, do you think your project could benefit from a fatherhood training on inclusion? Based on the fact 91% said they hadn't had one, we're going to go with yeah. Absolutely. Okay. All right. That was a quickie. So Rich is here. And so I just want to introduce Rich and introduce a couple of thoughts around homeless fathers. And again, we really thank Carol and others, Carol Melton and others who raised this as an issue to help us really think about the population of fathers that are served through Healthy Start across urban, rural, tribal, and border communities, and many low-income fathers and many fathers of color that have lots of issues. And so we focus on that mental health, particularly with Dr. Dan Singley, and hopefully you guys have accessed the presentation from the last month, as well as lots of tools that he shared with us, which you can use as a father coordinator in your work. So if you haven't gotten a hold of those tools, check out the Healthy Start Epic website and tap into some of those tools, because that just builds on this conversation around mental health and certainly connected to homelessness. And so a couple of things I want to share, because these 4 areas, homelessness, incarceration, mental health, and substance abuse, are very related, connected. As you know, when you work with these dads, a homeless dad is usually dealing with some of these other issues. If he was formerly incarcerated, well, the chances of homelessness are huge. And so with that, a couple of things to say. Understanding that fathers provide care and support that improve children's life outcomes as well. And when it comes to children living in poverty, the reason we emphasize fathers, and fathers are included, because they play a role in securing the well-being of children. Low-income fathers should be a part of the family policy equation. So we think about homelessness in this country and how we address homelessness. Dads are usually left out. And so when you want to do work around reform, it's really important to look at family policy, because family policy in this country usually means mom and child and not dad. And so that's important to remember as you think about homelessness. Work. And again, many low-income men, especially these men of color, face barriers to their playing a role in their children's lives. And so homelessness certainly is one of those things. So housing is unaffordable, as we know, to the lowest income workers throughout the United States. And sending a disproportionate amount, spending A disproportionate amount of your income on housing depletes resources that you have available for other things. Also, low-income families are at risk of housing instability, which often physically divides these families and harms relationships. And there's a good percentage of men that are custodial dads that are not able to get housing benefits in some states. And so again, when we think about low-income men's well-being, there are disconnections from employment, which we know of our men in this population, disconnection from society. Again, if you've been incarcerated before, or all kinds of stigma around these men, disconnections from stable housing. Again, if you're incarcerated, you're not eligible in many cases. And then there are other important concerns that dads have: family abuse, violence, substance abuse, mental health. All these things really affect men's mental health and their well-being. And so taking a few minutes to talk about these topics is really important today. And I'm glad that Rich is here, Rich DeRosa. Go ahead, Justin. Rich is here, and Rich is director of the Father Friendly Initiative. And many of you know Rich because he's also been a leader in working with the father coordinators in the past cycle. And so we're happy to have Rich here. And he's going to talk about the Father Friendly Initiative a little bit, and then what they've done around homelessness in Boston. So Rich, I'm going to take you off mute. There you go.
So again, everyone, my name is Rich DeRosa. I am the Director of Behavioral Health at the Boston Public Health Commission. So today, I just want to take a little bit of time talking about just what brought me here to the fatherhood world, and then talk about a program that we initiated to address the specific issue of single fathers and custody of their children and housing. I apologize that I don't have slides. I actually am coming from a doctor's appointment right now, so that's why I'm a little bit late today. So I was born here in Boston in 1965 to a Italian white woman and a Black father. I was immediately placed up for adoption and spent a number of years being bounced around the system up until the age of about 14, when I was moved in with who I consider my father, Roger Jackson, he was the district attorney of Barnstable County here in Massachusetts. Excuse me. He's currently retired, living in Texas now. But I moved in with him when I was 14. And he was the one that really sort of took me from being very much lost in the system. I really wasn't really focused on any future activities. I was highly suicidal, a very anxious kid. I tended to isolate and not really interact with other children or adults. And he sort of methodically sort of put me into different types of programs that would develop my leadership skills. But in addition to that, sort of provided that guidance in terms of issues around competence, for example. One of the things that he would do is he would really demand a certain level of competence, but expect excellence. So with that, kind of went away a lot of the stressors that I experienced around school. And again, being placed in an adoptive home, a lot of times families have this expectation of what you're going to be. And that's true for any child that's born into a family. But when you've got a child who's sort of been drifting around a little bit, you as a parent really aren't going to have a lot of control over sort of the impact of that. You certainly can mitigate the impact, but it existed and there's going to be consequences to that. He was really good about addressing those things. One pivotal moment in my adolescence was when I was transitioning from the 11th grade to the 12th grade. I had, and again, was somewhat aimless at that point, but my dad sort of sat me down and gave me some choices in terms of what the next steps were after high school. One of which was that I could live at home and pay rent, which would be 25% of whatever I made. I could go to the local community college, live at home. And as long as I maintained my grades, I wouldn't have any rent or any financial responsibilities. I could move out of my own and rent my own place. Given that I was a part-time worker at McDonald's at the time, I could not afford that, as many of our dads today can't afford. Or he said, you can go away to college and have the college experience, which obviously that's what I chose, because I would be off in the dorms. I didn't have financial expectations or responsibilities, and lots of freedom. And in making that decision to go off to college, I begun to sort of develop these longer term plans, like what am I going to do? So as I was transitioning from the 11th to the 12th grade, as I was selecting my courses, I wanted to take this class called Senior Seminar, which is an honors level class. And I was pretty much a basics level kid, which is that lower level expectation. Folks didn't expect a lot of me in school. But when I went in to meet with my guidance counselor, he basically let me know that that class was much too advanced for me, and that I would have to choose something else. As a result, that evening when I went home, both my foster brother and I were both in high school at the time, so we had class selection at the same time. He had casually asked how it went, and I explained to him that I couldn't take this class, at which point he kind of exploded a bit in the house, started yelling and screaming about how he pays taxes, and how folks are not going to tell his boys what they can and can't take in school, and left me with the instruction to return to school and let that guidance counselor know. By the way, the guidance counselor's name was Mr. White, that either he signed me up for that class or my dad was going to come down and sign me up for that class. And that sort of started me rolling up a hill as opposed to down a hill. And I went off to college and found a significant amount of success in college. I shifted from a C/D student with a couple of B's here and there to a solid A/B student in college, undergrad, and then I went on to do graduate work. In the way that I sort of structured it, I knew I wanted to go into mental health given my own experiences. And the way that I structured my experience was that during my bachelor's level program, I'd spent a great deal of time around youth, working in our juvenile justice system, as well as in alternative schools and residential programs for youth. And that really gave me the opportunity to build my nomenclature in terms of the field, get some experience, as well as review numerous assessments and really learn how to develop and execute those. And then in my master's program, and this is really where things sort of shifted for me in terms of fatherhood. And one of the things folks will say, well, when did you get into fatherhood? And I've never really been into exclusively fatherhood. I'm really a systems-oriented clinician. So we serve the family. And I remember one of my first jobs in my, when I was in master's program, was on a crisis team. And I worked with this amazing clinician called Karen Braun. And we would go out into the community and respond to various crises that folks were having. Ken, why are you texting me while I'm on talk? Oh, sorry. So I guess I have 7 minutes left. So end all be all, I sort of moved through the system, became very successful as a mental health practitioner and moved into more program development and management as a result of my need to really sort of look more systemically at issues. So one of the issues that we're looking at in Boston was this issue of homelessness, both in terms of mothers and fathers. And this was first raised with moms around social terms of health, identifying if we get pregnant women into stable housing, their stress levels will go down and their birth outcomes will go up. One, we would never see such an immediate response. Like if we get someone housing, 9 months later, the stress is going to be so much lower that's going to have an impact. But we certainly want to look closely at the subsequent pregnancies that these women are having. But during that process, I'd raised the issue of men or dads. And at the point of inception, it wasn't politically feasible at that time, given that we were already talking about moms and that was somewhat of a political issue. But when we renegotiated the grant, we did include dads, and we included fathers who are homeless with custody of their children, as well as fathers who are homeless who do not have custody of their children. And we really wanted to focus on this foster care issue, which sort of brings me full circle in terms of my personal life, of looking at really identifying them as the highest risk. They clearly, if they're in a stranger's house, they're more at risk than actually being with their parents. So we really want to target them, and we've been running into real problems. We've housed our homeless dad. We had one homeless dad that we did house. He had custody of his kids. That went fairly rapidly. Once he entered the program, he was housed within 60 days, compared to the 5 or 10 years it takes to get an interview. And then our second dad was a foster care dad who entered the program in 2017. And we've been working with the sites, our child protective sites, around identifying dads that are appropriate for this program, i.e. once they get housing, the children will return. And the barrier we're running into is every time it ends up in the legal department's office, they're cutting our necks off, despite our faces. They're basically saying, we're not willing to say, guarantee the kids are being returned to the dad, because something might happen in between. So that's where we're at with this program. I apologize for it being so short, but I'm happy to answer any questions or continue to talk. Just let me know.
One question I had, I think would be helpful for folks, is just from your perspective, are you seeing any trends in more dads getting custody? Because I know with the last couple of years with the opioid crisis, with mom, situations with moms, some dads have been stepping up. So are we seeing a trend in more dads getting custody of their children, which housing is becoming a more greater issue now?
Right, we're seeing the trend of fathers being the most appropriate person to get housing, to get the custody of the children, but they don't have housing to obtain that. Mm-hmm. And then what we basically say to our child protective services is, give us a letter that basically says, if this father obtains housing, the plan is to reunify. They're not even willing to do that. Mm-hmm. So this latest one, we did an end run around. We got this guy into a shelter, so he's now on the list and in the pipeline to get housed. But my next step is really, in terms of this project, of really reaching out to the commissioner of DCF and really identifying a high-level person that we can communicate with as we process these guys. Because it seems like it's ending up in a different person's desk.
All right. So, Rich, thank you for that. And so I'll invite others like Carol and other folks that are also looking at this issue within your program. Perhaps down the road we can have a smaller group. I know with the collab that we're going to provide for you all, there's be an opportunity there to have a smaller group just to talk about these issues. Because again, as Rich was alluding to, when men have custody of their children, it doesn't always come with housing. And so this challenge of getting housing. And so that may be something that's relevant for many of you out there. And so again, we'll have an opportunity to create a subgroup in the collab to focus on this. So thanks again, Rich. I started to have it be shorter, but there'll be an opportunity to do it a bigger. And I know you also have your slide presentation. If you want to make that available to people, they can get it in the follow-up too, if you want.
Yep.
All right.
Absolutely.
Thank you. All right. So just a couple of other things to support what we're talking around homelessness is something from the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition we wanted to make available to you. But again, from their report, people experiencing homelessness are 11 times more likely to face incarceration. And also, formerly incarcerated individuals are nearly 10 times more likely to be homeless. And so this is a great article and a great report. And we've put a link here so when you get access to the presentation, you'll be able to read more on it for those that are really interested in looking at this report. But it's Return to Nowhere by the Texas Criminal Justice Coalition. And also a friend of fatherhood work around this nation is the Prison Policy Initiative. And again, we just did some research to pull out another good report that would be great for all Healthy Start projects. And you can go to that site, and if you want to see what's happening in your state in particular, you can also do some searches within the prison initiative. But again, this is a great report, Nowhere to Go, looking at homelessness among formerly incarcerated people. And again, very relevant to our population, but looking at the causes of homelessness among former prisoners include discrimination, which is something our Healthy Start programs are addressing, a reliance on criminal records to screen tenants, a shortage of affordable housing, and then these large security deposits and other application requirements like professional references. So there's so many things that end up kicking many out, and men in particular we're talking about today. So this is another great report, Nowhere to Go. So again, the link is there for you when you follow up. So we're running on time today, but we wanted to get more deeper into the conversation of incarceration. So I'll go through these fairly quickly, but when you get the slides, they're self-explanatory. So we'll run through those. But just again, looking at impact of incarceration, its connection to fatherhood, again, looking at men that are released from prison, and over 70% of them are fathers or have fathered a child, and that number has certainly gone up according to the National Fatherhood Initiative recent reports. Again, and they want to connect with their families, their children, and community, but there are challenges based on them being incarcerated prior. Looking at peer support and masculine norms on incarceration's length. And so many of you are looking at issues around masculinity and how that plays a role. Certainly ideas around masculinity is important, and we know that African American Latino men are disproportionately impacted by incarceration, and incarceration certainly impacts medical and psychiatric problems, and if you have an existing condition, incarceration could exacerbate those. And so it's important to look at those issues around health of these men when they go in, and then certainly their health when they come out. But peer support and masculinity impact lengths of incarceration as well. Also, prevention, promotion, and continuing health care for prisoner reentry initiatives. This is important. Again, we think of some of the health issues that we're talking about, but looking at the unintended consequence of incarceration, health and functioning of those incarcerated, again, social network and community, looking across that. So prevention is important to consider both culturally, community context, et cetera, and then also looking at barriers to reentry. All right. We want to also, we have been already talking about mental health and substance abuse. Again, I refer you to the Healthy Start Epic site to look at some of the materials that Dr. Singley has made available. And Dr. Derek Gordon, who is a friend of Healthy Start, and he's been working with some of you and with the association for many years. He also has contributed to some of this mental health and substance abuse. And so a little bit on his work you'll find when you read, but just talking about the many faces of manhood and health, and looking at masculinity across different social situations, and then how that plays into health. I think when we look at behaviors, when men do substance abuse, violence, et cetera, his research lets us know that toughness was related to the drinking, the marijuana use, hard drug use, et cetera. And then anti-femininity was related to exercise and junk food consumption. So it's a great research that he's done. You have reference to that as well. And also status was related to marijuana use and approach significance for alcohol use, which again gets into the substance abuse conversation we wanted to share with you today. So basically, and there's also some research that was done, produced in JAMA with my colleagues from Harvard and Boston University. Bottom line for these men is there's a need for more effective social supports and supporting these men around all of these issues. So with our time, yes, let's go with this question. If you use a chat box, this question is, what is your current recruitment process for Healthy Start participants, your fathers?
While people are chatting into this, I just want to flag a question that came in earlier. We need a little clarification. So can programs enroll single fathers with an infant younger than 18 months? And would that person count as a Healthy Start dad?
So based on what I've heard from the division, yes. And I know Kadora is on the phone, Kadora Barnes, who's a project officer within HRSA division. But again, the question is, a single dad who has a child, infant less than 18 months old, can they be enrolled in Healthy Start? And the answer that we've asked this question before the division, and the answer was yes. That is a Healthy Start participant. That father is a Healthy Start father participant, along with that child. Twofer. Okay. So I know Kadora's out there, so she hadn't said no, so I think I'm okay. All right. Thank you for that question. Okay. So again, just share recruitment process. All right. And the infant must be, thank you, Kadora. So the infant must be enrolled in Healthy Start. Okay. So that's how he gets to be counted. The infant has to be enrolled. Thank you. Okay. The infant has. So when you think of your recruitment process, if you don't have a process in place, just remember the who, what, when, where, why, and how. Who's doing the recruitment? When are they going to do it? Where, when, upon entry, what are they going to do, and how they're going to keep dads engaged? That's just one little strategy we'll give you to think about putting in recruitment processes for just who's going to do it, what are they going to do, when are they going to do it, where would it happen, etc. Okay. Another question we have for the chat box is look at your current practice for enrolling father participants and what we can share with you there. And feel free to chat in. We're speeding it up, you may have noticed, but want you to describe your practice for enrolling father participants. And so what that means is you're looking at what tools do you have in place, what trainings have you had, trainings do you need, identifying that, and then also testing some approaches, and that's doing that PDSA, which is a Plan, Do, Study, Act. And that's, again, something the center can support you in executing. So you want to try some things to see if they work. And those are called PDSA cycles. So maybe there's some testing that you want to do as well. Also, when you think about your practice, the purpose, principles, policies, and practices, that's other things to think about as you're thinking about what your practice for enrolling fathers look like. So again, just wanted to give you some things to think about as you develop strategies around these areas. So again, we talked about the enrollment process, just to be consistent. There's a recruitment that takes place. Intake has to happen at one stage and some sort of assessment, and then that leads to referrals and leads to a care plan, as we've heard from some of you today. And then it's important for you as coordinators to be able to follow up and then follow through. And so when it's time to do not just your fellow report, but just reports for your program, as you're working with your colleagues to kind of share with them what's happening with the partner of the women that they're serving, and then the opportunity to really bring that entire family together. At the end of the day, having the story about the Healthy Start family, which is really what this new funding cycle does for us. It gives us an opportunity to tell the story of families and communities. Again, the expectation is for all Healthy Start programs to serve these 300 pregnant Healthy Start participants and also 100 father participants. Again, having strategies in place to target all partners of women that you enroll, and we know that some are gonna take a bite, and then we know you'll be successful in getting a few of them enrolled. And again, when we think of 100, it's really 1/3. So again, if you're successful in reaching out to all, you're gonna get some, and then you'll eventually get to enroll a few through some of the processes we've heard today. So that's the expectation. We've shared this continuum flow before. So when you enroll a woman with the Healthy Start worker, she connects to the fatherhood coordinator. He reaches out to the father participant, and enrollment happens there. Or enrollment happens immediately with the Healthy Start worker, just depends on how your program is designed. This is just a flow chart that we're using to kind of help you think about what process works best for you. But again, the goal is to make sure that dads are enrolled and participating and included in your Healthy Start program. And then also, as you make external referrals, you're clear about what services he's getting outside of your program, and you're able to report on them all. Again, think about our expectation. Another way of looking at it, when you think again of these 300 participants, you're talking 25 a month. And so Healthy Start workers, depending on how many you have, they should have a monthly goal. And the father coordinator, you have a monthly goal of these women participants again, and then targeting the dads of these women. You certainly should be able to get to your 100 Healthy Start father participants. Again, when you think of the 4 approaches for Healthy Start and the 3 benchmarks specifically around fatherhood, the approaches really involve the recruitment, the outreach, being clear about enrollment, clear about the services, and being able to describe the partner engagement across those approaches. And then again, we've talked about the 3 benchmarks, particularly for fathers, which is involvement during pregnancy, participation in appointments, and then reading. And again, we encourage you to look at all of the benchmarks because there's ways to include dad in many of those, especially, as I said, around the breastfeeding. And father coordinators should know that that's the biggest area of challenge for most Healthy Start sites now, meeting that particular benchmark. And so we're really focusing a lot of our energy and support around increasing better performance in those benchmarks for the Healthy Start program. So we want you engaged with that. When you think again, opportunities to include him, just another way of looking at it and hearing it differently, but look within your program structure, how a dad's included, your program services that you're offering, the systems around, the partnerships that you have, again, thinking of your CAN development, and then the wide open door, the first door is really through the female participant herself, because she's the one that you get to ask, do you want your partner involved? And so don't neglect that first door to go through, but certainly looking at other doors of opportunity where dads can be included in your work. So another chat we wanted to ask you about, so a couple of minutes, but what are your current enrollment numbers for father participants? And again, you answered a question earlier in today's webinar, so that's sufficient, but we wanted to ask the question at this point, just to point to the enrollment numbers, because some folks, perhaps you're under reporting the engagement of the father. So if you're not capturing all those activities that you're doing with dads, that he's actually coming to those visits, I mean, you should be documenting that he's supporting her in the prenatal visits. If there are classes that he's attending with her, making sure that you're documenting and reporting on what how these dads are participating within your program. That's really helpful information to put in your reports for the project officer to be able to read about how dads are actually engaged. And then again, how you are counting, again, to ensure that you have Healthy Start fathers connected to the Healthy Start woman or the Healthy Start baby. That's really important. And as I said, many of you have talked about you're attracting other fathers and men, and that's great because some of your fatherhood activities include those folks. And then we talk about preconception, at least you know that you're educating the community of fathers around some of these issues. So should they become pregnant, they're able to get enrolled to Healthy Start. But being able to document if you're doing education sessions for men and fathers, and Bob and John bring their 2 friends, and now all of a sudden you have 4 people there. You can talk about those 4 people, show that for a training that you had for your Healthy Start dads. So just how you're counting your enrollment numbers, how you're counting and how you're reporting, we really want you to encourage you to really think about how you're engaging these fathers and be able to report accurately the activities that's happening at your local site. So this is important. We wanted to get future topics from you that you wanted to talk about at Fatherhood Talk Tuesday. And it's something that Brandon and I talk about all the time, but we want to make sure that we're covering topics that you want to hear about, in addition to coming up with the topics based on what we've heard from the needs assessment, which is what today's subjects were a result of. Okay, and if you have any questions at this time, you certainly can type those into the chat box as well. But again, if there's a future topic, and some of you answered last month a question that we asked if you would like to present your program on the Fatherhood Talk Tuesday. We have those folks that volunteered for that, and we certainly will follow with you. But if there are others, you can let us know this time as well if you're interested in sharing your program. And we have a framework in which you can prepare for that, and so that we can have a presentation, lessons learned, and recommendations, kind of a format that we'll use. Okay? Okay. So with that, we want to thank you for joining today, and a couple of announcements that I wanted to make on behalf of the TA and Support Center. Again, we're looking forward to providing in-person TA when we can, but And again, the TA that we're looking at now is really based on what we've learned from the needs assessment, which includes hearing from not only project directors, father coordinators, project officers, and others. So we're really putting together TA based on that. And some of you participate in some of the things we've done so far. We've been able to provide a lot of consultation around fatherhood. We're planning to do an in-person meeting as well. And just understand that all TA will not be provided virtually. So we're going to certainly do in-person meetings and when we can, but we want to maximize the resources that we have. And so we're going to continue responding to TA, whether it be one-on-one. So if you want a phone consultation to kind of work through to understand what your need is, we're here for that, doing consultation there. And if you have a particular need that connects with a subject matter expert, make that request for TA and we'll connect you with the subject matter expert. And we've been doing that. And so if you have a particular training need, let us know. Also, as I said, with the in-person, we were hoping to take advantage of the grantees meeting to provide some in-person TA there. We'll continue to do virtual offerings, but we certainly will take advantage of every avenue we can to provide TA to you. So just expect that. And also, we plan to follow with you all, our coordinators, again, for that separate session where we're actually going to review the findings from the needs assessment. We shared we wanted to do that last month. And so once Brenda and I set up a time, it'll be a different time than our Fatherhood Talk Tuesday. But we certainly want to meet with fatherhood coordinators to look at the highlights from that report to just unpack some of the needs a bit deeper. And so those are things that you can expect over the next few weeks. And again, if you have any particular need or don't know what you really need, you're more than welcome to call us and set up a phone consultation and we'll work with you on that. We're looking forward to hanging out in Ohio as we work with Cadora and her sites. We've been working, we have worked with South Carolina already, and we're looking at other states and seeing what we can do as far as in-person to bring sites together. So that's where we are as a center. We want to be responsive to your needs, and so make sure you let us know what they are. So if you have any other questions or thoughts, feel free to use the chat box now. And if there aren't any other, it's 4:27. And if there's not any other questions, we would like to conclude today's Fatherhood Talk Tuesday. And thank you again, Cadora, for sitting in for Brandon. And if you have any questions or thoughts, feel free to reach out to us, or you can contact Brandon, who's our fatherhood lead there at the division. And again, if you have questions for us or anything, just reach out to us. And again, today's webinar, the recording, as well as the chat box will be available, and we'll let you know when that is up. With that, thank you and have a good rest of the week.